Hello, this is day 2 of our conference on integrity. It has been an exciting first day with our distinguished guests talking about integrity as an imperative to economic recovery and development, and also technology and innovations, the ethics behind and ahead. On day 2 of the conference, we will hear from 2 panels and some more important speakers. At the start, I invite you to listen to a video message from John Denton, Secretary General of ICC in Paris.
Ilir, Adita, colleagues, many thanks for your invitation to join you today. I am very impressed with ICC Albania's Integrity Week and the way that ICC national committees have worked so constructively and successfully together in developing this national awareness-raising campaign, modelled on the importance of business integrity, inspired by an initiative of ICC Netherlands. As many of you will know, ICC, the International Chamber of Commerce, is the institutional representative of 45 million companies worldwide and the recognised voice of business in intergovernmental fora. We work to promote international trade, responsible business, and a global approach to regulation by combining our global influence through advocacy and standard setting activities. ICC was founded at the end of a major worldwide crisis, World War I. Our founders created ICC with a vision that open trade and investment across borders can help foster prosperity and peace among nations. And last year, ICC issued a landmark centenary declaration setting out our commitment to enable business worldwide to secure peace, prosperity, and opportunity for all, and supporting private sector leaders to meet the calls for a more inclusive and responsible capitalist model. Today, we are faced with a new worldwide crisis, COVID-19. The pandemic continues to affect lives and livelihoods everywhere and has compounded existing global fragilities like economic exclusion, social inequalities, and environmental degradation. Faced with these compounding challenges, there is an opportunity for policymakers and business leaders to unite and take collective action to ensure a resilient and sustainable recovery for all. ICC has adopted a whole-of-organisation approach to the COVID-19 pandemic, with all our core activities refocused on the impacts of COVID-19 on society, health, and the global economy. The range of activity includes ensuring proper information flows, especially WHO-endorsed guidance to the network as a trusted source for businesses worldwide, advocacy on critical global systemic issues, such as G20 action on trade and customs, development of tools such as the health guidance and the AOK pass to reassure global mobility. We are using our extensive network of businesses and chambers of commerce to forge and build upon relationships with major multinational organizations, WHO, WTO, WCO, IMF, and the UN, to ensure business realities factor into policy making and business directs its efforts to the most pressing and important causes. ICC shares the view that integrity is central to the achievement of a sustainable, inclusive, and resilient economic recovery from this pandemic. Let me be clear. A crisis is no excuse to engage in unethical and corrupt business conduct. As many of you know, ICC issued earlier this year our guidance on integrity for a resilient response and rebuild after COVID-19, where we called upon governments and businesses to uphold the highest standards of integrity for a resilient COVID-19 response and rebuild. In this guidance, we underscored the importance of 1. maintaining integrity and transparency in procurement during times of crisis. 2, preserving the use of due diligence to address risks of corruption and human rights impacts presented by global supply chain disruptions and discontinuities. 3, countering illicit practices in times of crisis, such as counterfeit medicines and medical supplies. 4, addressing corruption risks related to customs. And 5, preserving the rule of law during crisis. One of the major concerns we have is the devastating effects of COVID-19 on MSMEs and SMEs and their workforces, which is why we launched the Save Our SMEs campaign that I'm here to speak to you about today. SOS was launched at the end of March to call for urgent and decisive action by all stakeholders to save our SMEs and micro SMEs. The campaign has 3 main objectives. 1, shine a spotlight on the devastating impact of COVID-19 on small businesses and their employees. 2, ensure effective policy and fiscal responses at both the international and national levels. And 3, provide resources and tools to small businesses to help them navigate the unprecedented economic shock and post-recovery landscape. The SOS website is a one-stop shop for policy. It's a one-stop shop for policy tools, as well as funding resources and free services for SMEs and MSMEs globally. Let me take a moment to point out here how the interlinked health and economic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic have clearly exposed the business case for a new operating model where purpose and profit are pursued in tandem. Simply put, there will be no successful businesses in a failed world. The rebuild from this crisis will require genuine systems change and meaningful public-private collaboration to address the critical issues which serve to cause chaos in our world: economic exclusion, social inequality, and environmental degradation. ICC is committed to enabling responsible business practices to accelerate progress to a more resilient, sustainable future. From our perspective, integrity and human rights are equally critical to the immediate response to COVID-19. In short, we have an obligation to ensure everyone is protected and included in the response to the pandemic. And I can tell you that the business community intuitively knows that the only way to counter the human and economic effects of the crisis is to put people first. ICC will continue to lead on the immediate business response to preserve lives and livelihoods. At the same time, we are already focusing on our contribution to the recovery and resilience phase as we rebuild. The midterm response to the impacts of the pandemic will likely define the economic, social, and environmental outlook for generations to come, which provides us all with an opportunity to use the recovery phase to rebuild a more resilient and sustainable world. There can be no doubt that we will not be returning to business as usual, although we do not yet know what shape the new normal will take. ICC is uniquely placed to play a major role in shaping and driving the implementation of a recovery strategy. COVID-19 has laid bare fundamental tensions in today's global economic and political systems, such as the relationship between global connectivity and vulnerabilities, as well as the weakness of institutional responses to the crisis. These system fragilities will need to be squarely addressed if we are to build back better. There are also risks that the midterm response to crisis will be driven by populist and protectionist sentiment, factors which could exacerbate the toll of the pandemic. We are working to inform debate across three key themes. 1. Renewing global governance. 2. Shaping a new role for business in society. And 3. Rebuilding global commerce. This will require a variety of initiatives at different levels, with true openness and collaboration between business, governments, and civil society. ICC is committed to continue to work very hard to do its part. I thank you for this opportunity to speak with you today.
It is now time to follow a speech by Ambassador Vincenzo Del Monaco, head of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, presence in Albania.
Dear International Chamber of Commerce of Albania Secretary General, Your Excellencies, distinguished audience, I accepted to attend this event and offer my view on integrity and corruption out of my firm belief that corruption destroys the foundation of the modern state, the trust of citizens in institutions, in elected and non-elected state officials. We must fight this scourge with all means and resources at your disposal, with full determination and dedication. Corruption in Albania, as elsewhere, is a complex and multifaceted problem. Corrupt institutions raise the cost of doing business, increase informality, discourage foreign investors, distort the market and investment priorities, and hinder effective service delivery of public services to citizens, thus eroding citizens' trust in government officials and institutions. Therefore, we must recognize that corruption is not merely a financial issue, but a key factor undermining human development, democracy, and the rule of law. Through its Ministerial Council decision in 2004, number 11 to be precise, the OSCE, and I'm quoting here, recognizes that corruption represents one of the major impediments to the prosperity and sustainable development of the participating states, that undermines their stability and security and threatens the OSCE's shared values. In line with its mandate, the OSCE presence has been supporting Albania over the past years to advance its anti-corruption policies and practice, as well to promote the value of rule of law, anti-corruption, and human rights. The presence remains engaged in support for policy making, technical and expert support on legislation, capacity development of relevant institutions and actors, and evidence-based research to orient anti-corruption policies to citizens' needs. We foster a culture of institutional integrity both at central and local levels to support development of a reliable, functional, and transparent public administration. We promote international best practices and instruments on key areas such as conflict of interest, whistleblower protection, public procurement, and data transparency. We will step up our outreach activities to talk to the young people, to students, and advocating for more integrity in public lives, inter alia, through targeted trainings and educational programs. Ladies and gentlemen, corruption remains a priority challenge for Albania, despite significant efforts from the government during the last few years to address it, including notable improvements to the policy and legislative framework. And most unfortunately, citizens' perceptions of corruption remain high, according to international indexes, pointing to the fact that more needs to be done to combat this phenomenon and rebuild their trust. To this end, sustained progress on implementation of laws and good governance policy should be preserved, combined with improved accountability, increased engagement of citizens, including through higher transparency of the government. Rule of law needs further consolidation through the establishment of the new specialized institutions, SPAC and NBI, which are inter alia geared at tackling corruption. However, corruption cannot be tackled by governments acting alone. Measures to fight corruption should be carried out in an integrated manner. Collective action is needed in order to achieve greater impact measured through concrete results. Engagement with civil society, the business community, media, academia, and youth remains of paramount importance. They have a strong contribution to the fight against corruption through monitoring and prevention. As just one example, the OSCE presence in Albania is proud to support an ongoing project coupling local civil society actors with international experts in using open data to examine potential corruption risks in the field of public procurement, all in close cooperation with the Public Procurement Agency. I personally believe that forums and awareness activities such as this, with representatives who are also reputed subject matter experts across sectors, can facilitate a constructive dialogue, collaboration, and complementarity actions between the Albanian government, civil society, organizations, and business community in combating corruption. I commend the hosts of this timely initiative, the International Chamber of Commerce Albania, the Ministry of Justice of Albania, as well as the funding partners, the Embassy of the Kingdom of the Netherlands and the EU delegation in Albania. The OSCE presence in Albania remains your long-standing partner in such efforts, and I sincerely hope that the full week of events ahead will raise a united voice in promoting integrity. Thank you very much.
The first panel for today will talk about the human capital at the core of responsible societies. Our guests are Mr. Crispin Conroy of the ICC Permanent Observer at the UN Geneva in Switzerland. Also, we have Vivian Schiavi, Deputy Director for Integrity and Anti-Corruption and Responsible Business Conduct of the ICC in France. Mr. Dante Pesci, member of the UN on Business Human Rights in Chile. Also, we have Mr. Erald Pashaj, Country Director for EP Partners Consultancy for Albania and Kosovo, and Professor Nabila Gjindi from the Mediterranean University in Tirana, Albania. The moderator will be Mr. Angelo Haruni, journalist at A2 CNN in Tirana.
I would like to welcome all our participants who will be joining me in this third panel of the Week of Integrity in Albania, organized by the International Chamber of Commerce. My name is Angelo Haruni, and I'm a reporter for A2 CNN, this event's media partner. In the next hour, we will exchange experiences and opinions on the topic of human rights and business at the core of a sustainable future. As we live through this pandemic, many challenges have arisen and have exposed vulnerabilities in economies and societies all over the world. The roles of both the state and the private sector have proven crucial in the efforts to fight this crisis and get back on our feet. But as we do this, we must take into strong consideration the impact that the actions of these two players have in human lives. In times like this, corruption tends to thrive, undermining a country's ability to respond effectively to the crisis and ignoring human rights in the process. So good governance and business integrity are our only chance in preserving human dignity and beating the pandemic. One of the pillars in our efforts to build a resilience for a sustainable future is the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. The UNGPs were unanimously endorsed 10 years ago by the UN's Human Rights Council. The ICC has been one of the key drivers of embedding the UNGPs in corporate practice. But as these pillars call for cooperation and collaboration between states, private sector, and other stakeholders, many challenges still remain today. I will have the pleasure to discuss the challenges and the proposals of actions that needed to be taken with our 5 panelists. But before we begin talking on the subject, I will invite our speakers to make a quick introduction of themselves and their roles in this important matter. So without delay, Mr. Dante Pesce, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation. My name is Dante. Greetings from Santiago, Chile, where I am and where I live. And I'm currently vice chair of the Working Group on Business and Human Rights, but I'm also the director of a research center at the Catholic University of Valparaiso, my hometown, on the role of business and society, to put it more generally. So it's a great pleasure to be here. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Pesce. Now the floor goes to Crispin Conroy. Thank you for joining us here today.
Right, thank you very much. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you here on the panel. I'm based in Geneva, so greetings from Geneva. I'm the representative director of the International Chamber of Commerce here, and I lead the ICC office. I'm also a permanent observer of the ICC to the United Nations at Geneva. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Conroy. Ms. Vivian Schiavi, the floor is yours.
Director at the ICC Global Secretariat for Business Integrity, Responsible Business Conduct, and Anti-Corruption. ICC pursue this advocacy with regard to the UN, the G20, and other fora, and in terms of capacity building for companies. We represent in our commission 400 companies worldwide. I'm an attorney, a member of the New York Bar, and I practice international commercial law before joining ICC. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Schiavi. Professor Nabila Jindi, please.
Thank you very much for making me part of this panel. I feel honored. It's a pleasure, actually. I'm here in Tirana. So for many years, I have been teaching at the university. I am a professor at the currently, I'm a professor at the Mediterranean University of Albania. And I'm the head of international relations and the project development there. And for many years, I've been active in public sphere and politics and activisms, working with different think tanks and NGOs, and also having many publications and research on public policy and politics.
Thank you, Professor, for joining us today. The word is yours, Mr. Erald Pashai.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure being here today with you and talk about integrity and employment and everything related to people. So yes, you said my name is Erald Pashai, and since 2009 I have founded a HR company and human resources company in both Albania and Kosovo. Actually, we do employment services, training and development, we do assessments and surveys about our labor markets. Actually, we are in touch with both actors that play a role in the labor market. We talk about employers and the employees. We train them, we employ them, we try to do our best in order to make this labor market better and better year on year. So that's what I do since 2009.
Thank you very much. I'd like to address the first question to Mr. Pesce. The UN Working Group on Business on Human Rights is at the very center of business and human rights agenda. You and your colleagues at the Working Group have, as one of your key roles, the promotion of the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. What are your main priorities and the main challenges as we come to this 10th anniversary of the UNGPs just in June 2021?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Let's say, frame it in terms of the evaluation that we're doing. We're looking at the first 10 years of implementation of the guiding principles. That is a process taking place right now. And we will celebrate the 10th anniversary on the 16th of June next year in Geneva, when we will launch the roadmap, providing strategic guidance to all stakeholders in how to move faster and deeper and improve the uptake and the quality of implementation and its effectiveness globally. So that's the task that we have in front of us. And I would like to say that our entry point for this process is SDG Goal 17. We welcome collaboration. We welcome coalitions. We need a systemic approach to systemic challenges or failures in terms of governance. And therefore, we welcome the narrative and the wording of Goal 17, a renewed alliance for sustainable development in which governments have obligations, but where business have responsibilities to be part of the solution as business are part of the problem. So that's one thing. The second point is that when we look at the future, we move into Goal 16, which is the second most fundamental, or perhaps the first one in terms of practical implementation that we see as working group, is called peace, justice, and solid institutions. And one of the lessons that we have learned so far for the first 9.5 years of implementation is that solutions that can look good, let's say in a laboratory, can look good in a meeting with experts and let's say people convinced of this agenda already, and believers, let's say, is a conversation that has to be translated into practical solutions on the ground. But if on the ground, we don't have the institutions where to build these solutions on, in fact, they turn out to be just wishful thinking, just good intentions, but they will fail eventually, sooner or later, because we're not fixing or addressing root causes. And for addressing root causes like corruption, for example, of course, we need to work together and we need to attack that factor, like many others. If we want to address them realistically, we need to work together and see it holistically as it is. That's one thing. The good news of the evaluation of the first 10 years is that we have made some progress on the structural conditions of business and human rights. 10 years ago, this conversation didn't exist. Today is a conversation that is taking place and is becoming a normal topic for discussion at the Chamber of Commerce, at the employers, at the EU with legislation on its way, etc. So has become a normal conversation. The guiding principles and the due diligence at its core has been already integrated by ILO and OECD in their own standards, and is becoming legislation at the European Commission level right now. Is being discussed in that direction. So that is good news on the structural conditions, because it's a conversation that has become normal. Therefore, we can actually start having a conversation on implementation, effectiveness, etc. The second thing, in terms of processes, there are a number of processes on its way under this umbrella of a change of context. We have processes led by ICC, processes led by sector-specific industries, processes led by policymakers. So we have a variety of initiatives in the world, still not consistent enough, not harmonized enough, but at least moving in the right direction. And this process of evaluating is helping us to cluster around a shared vision and a shared ambition as we look into the future. And so on those two elements, we have made significant progress. On the third element of evaluation are outcomes, and outcomes have to be measured on the ground, access or not to remedy in case that harm happens. And the practical implementation of commitments made, obligations by governments, commitments by business on the ground where it hurts, where things happen. Where rights are not respected. And on that regard, we have a very, let's say, mixed picture, a patchwork of initiatives and innovations taking place, but certainly not on scale. So I will just end by saying the drivers for business and human rights are very clear. Societal expectations on the rise, a regulatory wave on the coming, business to business relation with greater impact in terms of traceability and expectations from clients of exporters, etc. And the financial sector kicking in very actively are all good news. What we need to do is harmonize the strategy, have common strategy, common goals that can be, let's say, we can synergize our initiatives, work more collaboratively and more actively in looking after impact. And we will move from pockets of innovations in, let's say, first phases or initial phases into mainstreaming what today is being pioneered. So my vision is positive in terms that we have accomplished quite a bit on certain fundamental elements, foundational elements, and then we will be moving into speed, scale, on the ground with a focus on effectiveness, and that is the vision that we have into the future. Thank you very much, Angelo.
Thank you, Mr. Pesce. I'd like to give the word to Ms. Vivian Schiavi. The International Chamber of Commerce launched a guidance on integrity for a resilient response and rebuild after COVID-19. This guidance calls on businesses and governments to uphold the highest standards of integrity for a resilient COVID-19 response and rebuild. Can you tell us a bit more from the foundations of this guidance and how that serves for better social cohesion? Thank you.
Yes, I'll be happy to. I'd like to just salute the initiative of ICC Albania in organizing ICC Integrity Week in this conference, and to thank the chair of ICC Albania, Ilir Daci, and ICC Albania Secretary General Ardita Seknej for this tremendous work and for inviting me. Thank you very much. It's an honor. Just to backtrack a second, ICC represents millions of companies worldwide in hundreds of countries. We work to promote international trade, responsible business conduct, and a level playing field for businesses throughout the world. ICC was a leader in the fight against corruption. We issued our first rules on combating corruption in the 70s to help companies comply with the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. And we have a whole suite of integrity tools now. We want to stress at ICC that preserving integrity is critical to the immediate response to the COVID-19 response and rebuild. The business community intuitively knows that the only way to counter the human and economic effects of the crisis is to put people first. So to ensure that the rule of law and good governance are upheld. A crisis is no excuse to engage in unethical and corrupt business conduct. ICC issued, as you mentioned, our ICC guidance on integrity for rebuild and response after COVID-19. We pointed out that the COVID-19 pandemic creates environments that increase risks for corruption, bribery, fraud, money laundering, and other forms of illicit behavior. We encourage corporate leaders to uphold the highest standards of integrity in business transactions and to continue to act responsibly when conducting business. We warn against breaches of integrity in procurement. Both the public and private sector have to comply with transparency and competition principles. Digitalization and e-procurement are highly recommended for enhanced speed and transparency in the tender process. Companies need to maintain due diligence, what my colleague Dante Pesce was referring to address risks of corruption and human rights impacts in global supply chains disruptions. Companies have to keep up with their risk management controls to ensure compliance with standards. See the impact not just on the company, but on people in terms of these disruptions. We also need to address corruption risks related to customs. There's pressure to get medical equipment, vaccines, supplies through customs quickly. So joint public-private action is needed to ensure that the integrity of supply chains and border crossings are upheld. Last, but certainly not the least, ICC points to the crucial need of preserving rule of law and the adherence to human rights and open, just societies in the times of crisis, at all times, but particularly in times of crisis. We've seen a rise in authoritarianism in certain areas. Laws and policies, if there's exceptional uses of government's power, there needs to be specifics as to the limits and the scope and duration of those exceptional uses of power. And so such concerns are especially acute in certain countries characterized by poor governance, weak regulatory oversight, partial judicial systems, and corruption. So to sum up, building back better means putting good governance, integrity, ethical leadership at the heart of the rebuild. The pandemic creates new challenges for integrity, but new openings to raise awareness on the need for all to abide by high standards of integrity and transparency. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chiave. I'd like to give the word to Mr. Conroy. The question is this: going back to the UNGPs, Mr. Pesce highlighted the need for collaboration between states and the private sector. So what is the position of the private sector represented here by the ICC, one of the leading business organizations worldwide? Where lies the major challenges for the business? Thank you.
Thanks, Angelo. And look, I just wanted to go back one step. You know, it's a great question, but I just wanted to take us back one step before the UNGPs and the context we're talking about. Vivian's already mentioned that ICC is the institutional representative of over 45 million companies, small, medium, and large, in over 100 countries. And we're a supporter of the multilateral system, the international framework that we're talking about here. And when you think about the UN and its agencies and institutions like the WTO, they're basically problem-solving organizations in which states and other stakeholders increasingly can address common challenges. And my role in Geneva, working with colleagues like Dante and the working group, is to provide a constructive business voice as we seek to address these challenges together. And in the panel description itself, it refers to these global challenges and the need for all stakeholders to join together to find solutions. And the roadmap that we're talking about here, that the international community agreed on, whether we're talking about inequality, poverty, climate change, access to education, human rights, is articulated in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Agenda. And Dante, you mentioned that the need for all stakeholders to be involved is encapsulated in SDG 17 on the importance of partnerships. But I want to stress that, and this is why I'm coming back to this, taking a step back, is that the SDG roadmap comes within the overarching framework of the global human rights obligations enshrined in the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, which will celebrate the 72nd anniversary on the 10th of December. And it's in this context of the obligations, the human rights obligations in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that states and businesses have agreed on a specific roadmap, which are the UNGPs you've been referring to, which guide states and businesses in relation to the promotion and protection of human rights in business activity. We're really pleased to be one of the key business supporters of the initiative that Dante's mentioning, the UNGP 10-year plus project. And as he said, you know, the involvement of stakeholders like business is going to be crucial in that dual process, the stock take and then the roadmap for the future, the vision for the future. In 2019, in our centenary year last year, we issued a centenary declaration, a landmark declaration, which set out our commitment to enable business worldwide to secure peace, prosperity, and opportunity for all. And that declaration committed ICC to playing a leading role in forging solutions to major global challenges, with a view to realizing those sustainable development goals that I mentioned within the overarching framework of respect for human rights. Now, the pandemic has even more starkly exposed three fundamental systemic fragilities: economic exclusion, social inequality, and environmental degradation. And we're committed to playing a leading role in addressing those fragilities as well. But I also wanted to stress that, you know, in our view, the pandemic has also exposed the fragility of global cooperation. Indeed, never before has such a systemic failure in global cooperation been so stark, and at a time when international cooperation and collaboration was so desperately needed. So in the COVID-19 context, we must all increase our efforts in this regard and work towards a recovery, as Vivian mentioned, based on a more resilient and sustainable future, with respect for human rights at the very core. Now, the description of in the panel also refers to the reframing. And I guess this comes to your challenge about, what are we going to do? What are the challenges for business as we move forward? Now, the project that Dante and the working group are leading on a stock take and roadmap for the future is crucial in this regard. And ICC and our business members, we continue to believe that the guiding principles represent the guide for the future, where human beings and corporations alike can thrive and prosper. And the roadmap phase will, as I said, contribute to the reframing exercise of what needs to be done by states and businesses to better implement the UNGPs, and how businesses themselves can better promote respect for human rights in their activities. And we look forward to contributing to this project, Dante, with you and your colleagues by sharing experiences from within our broad network. But we are concerned that 9 years on from the adoption of the UNGPs, that their implementation does remain incomplete. That's partly due to inactivity by states. Many states have not contributed through national action plans as they're required to. And we, that includes me and Viviane and many of our colleagues, have called for governments that haven't completed national action plans to do so urgently. And our network stands ready to contribute constructively to their elaboration. With specific reference to business, the work of embedding the UNGPs into corporate practices has been picking up impressive speed. And I think you mentioned that, Dante, that there has been some good work done with risk assessments, enhanced supply chain due diligence, and human rights training, all now routinely implemented in many enterprises. And ICC, through Viviane and the team in Paris, have done a lot to make that happen. But it's imperative we work together to accelerate these positive trends in the future. Now, the challenges, we see two challenges ahead in relation to better implementation of the UNGPs. The first is to ensure that these new business practices that I mentioned actually translate into improved human rights performance on the ground. But also, the second, to enable all businesses, regardless of their size, sector, or location, to embed respect for human rights throughout their operations. Now, some of the reframing, to use the panel's description, to ensure better implementation is already taking place. There are some existing and a number of new legal developments in this field, and Dante mentioned, of course, one of the key ones, certainly most high-profile ones, which is in the European Union. And these include what has been termed within the guiding principles a so-called smart mix approach of voluntary and mandatory measures, which the aim of which is to incentivize implementation by companies. Many of our companies and a number of jurisdictions are already actively consulting with governments on these new measures and about the new emerging approaches and frameworks, with a view to clarifying and improving the standards of responsibility and accountability for both states and businesses. We believe that any new frameworks, whether they're national or regional, must be internationally consistent, but also align completely with the standards embodied in the guiding principles. It's this ever-increasing patchwork, I think, as you mentioned, Dante, of measures in different jurisdictions that have the potential to present an obstacle to promoting implementation rather than enabling it. So as we move forward in our objective of embedding the UNGPs better in corporate practice worldwide, we're reiterating really that the critical factors to enable this implementation are consistency of approach and the objective of creating, as far as possible, a level playing field. This, of course, raises a number of complex questions that policymakers and businesses need to discuss as these sort of smart mix measures are being developed or reviewed in some jurisdictions. And these issues include things like mandatory reporting and due diligence approaches, which, like the ones in the EU, sectoral or cross-sectoral approaches. Some countries are considering measures that are specifically sectoral, others cross-sectoral. Also the limits of liability and what measures and incentives can be encouraged or used to be be used to encourage due diligence beyond that stricter liability. And also, what is reasonableness in terms of due diligence? These are all issues that are of concern to business and ones that we need to discuss and demystify, I guess, and get them out in the open and start talking to policymakers more. So we're organising a number of activities to facilitate this discussion, including with Dante and his colleagues. One is taking place on the 10th of December, on the same day as the celebration of the anniversary of the UN Human Rights Declaration. And that's on implementing human rights due diligence in global supply chains. And I'll share the information on this event and the registration link with ICC Albania. But we continue to believe that it's crucial, as you said, Dante, to scale up the implementation of the UNGPs with a view to intensifying the actual achievement of impact on the ground. When we're looking forward to the second decade of the UNGPs, our view is that we must place an absolute focus on policy interventions that can make an immediate difference in the real world, especially for those most vulnerable to human rights violations. Now, this will require a variety of initiatives at different levels, underpinned by true openness and a collaboration between business, governments, and civil society. So to conclude there, I applaud, Dante, your work and that of the working group, and we look forward to contributing to it in the next 6 months in the lead up to the commemoration in June next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Conrad. I'd like to bring the discussion more in the Albanian context. Professor Gjindi, being an academic for many years, you have worked closely with the youth and also the prospective professionals. What do youth aspirations look like in time of crisis like this of COVID-19? Are they prepared? Can they have a quick responsiveness?
Thank you very much. Actually, it looks like we shifted a little bit from the industry part and from all that has been said, but I'm happy that you're bringing into this conference the youth issue. Because when a crisis hits, it's easier to respond to if you already have useful tools in place, or if you are already prepared to innovate, reshape, and move fast. But COVID-19 did feel like this in Albania. COVID-19 pandemic brought to all of us uncertainties, instabilities, and so to young people, making them feel worried about this new reality they are living in and presenting several new challenges every day. The crisis has changed not only their daily routine, but also perceptions of everyday life. For some young people, rethinking the value of time and common moral principles appears to be the key. And for young people, the biggest lesson in this moment is understanding the value of time and responding to it. According to a new UN plan to address COVID-19, young people are some of the most affected by the pandemic's social economic impacts. Nevertheless, youth are also among the most active in global perspective and response. Not only are they in front line as health workers, but they are also advanced in health and safety in their roles as researchers, activists, innovators, and good communicators. After this massive confusion in our lives, the future of young people seems to be a kind of promising perspective in terms of seizing new emerging opportunities. It's giving an opportunity to look into how we need to better support our young generation, especially regarding health and educational resources. And here, we don't need to reinvent the wheel, for sure. It was already there. But we should count on the youngsters making that wheel move much faster. As such, decision makers must commit to ensuring youth voice as part of many solutions in Albania and get them heard, you know? That's why we need to spotlights on youth, young women and men, and find solution for a healthier, safer, and gender equality Albania.
Thank you, Professor Gindi. So staying on the topic of youth and the future and these challenges, especially during these times, I would like to ask Mr. Pashai. You have worked closely with businesses that look to hire staff. Judging from your experience, do we have now do we have the capacities, or are we building human capital? If not, when shall we start? Thank you.
Thank you. The question is, do we have the capacities? I don't think that we have. Of course, there is an increase in the number of people that would like always to be more educated, to develop more themselves. But I may say that it's not at the level that we want to be. In terms of, are we working to build up such capacities? So what are the businesses and also individuals to do for themselves? Still in this aspect, personally, I'm not happy. Why I'm saying that? Looking the countries around us, we are a European country, and we see the countries around us and we see that they are more developed than Albania is. So the main aspect to develop a country is the human capital. So I believe that our human capital is not at the level that we want it to be. In my view, I took some notes, and I may say that there are three main components why we are not building the human capital at the level that we want. The first one is that our economy is not very competitive. This is the main thing, according to me. If the economy is competitive, like it is in Germany, like it is in Switzerland, in the United States, everywhere, more competitive the economy, more competitive are the people, more they want to develop. The second thing, which indeed is not the second, but somehow is very important, is the mindset. Is the mindset of the people that we have to work to, which means that they have to build a mindset that if we will not develop the people and if we will not develop ourselves, there is no other way to develop. We cannot build our economy, build our human capacities by luck. That's simply not impossible. It's simply not possible. And the third one is the corruption. Is the corruption that, in my view, it's damaging the right employment. It's damaging the human rights. It's damaging in all aspects. If you ask me if there is one thing that is damaging the youth, which is damaging the development of people, is the corruption. And I can talk about corruption day and night, but the main thing is that the corruption is not giving to the people the right access. So you have a different access from me. Somebody have because of manipulations and corruption, they have access to the government, they have access to managerial positions, they have access to leadership positions. So these are the three components that we have to work at. This is what we try to do. The first thing is to make this economy more competitive, to work with their mindset and to teach them. And the third is the corruption. I can take you one very simple example. We deliver a lot of trainings, from sales skills to leadership skills and whatever. And we have a course which I have developed with a huge passion some years ago called Business Ethic and Anti-Corruption. Do you know how many times we have delivered that course in Albania? No, you have no guess. I will tell you, only once. Only once we have delivered that course. And sales trainings, we are delivering 10 sales trainings per month. This is okay, they cannot compare, but anti-corruption and business ethic, when I created that training, I thought that every supervisor or manager in a company must be part of this training. It helps them to understand many things. And we delivered that once, and even that company did only because they wanted the certificate, because they were the subcontractor of a big international company. That was the only reason they took that. So, and also I have delivered for my pleasure several times to my staff. That's it. So this is an example to tell you that how much is the awareness of the people of the corruption. First of all, the majority of the people, they think that corruption is a hard corruption. So you give money, they take money, as simple as that. It's not that. Corruption is in employment every day. Every day we employ people without norms and without having the right skills in place. But we employ them only because of some interventions, ups and downs, and the corruption system. We have to fight them. I may say that this is not something that is in Albania nowadays. It was in Albania even before 35 years. So the way that even during the socialist regime that we were, people were somehow not hired because of their skills, but because of their network, which was linked to a certain ideology. So, I mean that I have also a question, and I heard Mr. Conroy that he said that some of the countries, and I took note, some of the countries are not actioning or are not taking action to implement the UN guiding principles. My question is Albania part of the countries that took action or part of the countries that didn't take action?
Before we continue to the next topics, perhaps Mr. Conroy or Mr. Pesha would like to follow up on this question by Mr. Pashai.
Yeah, the picture of the world is that there are few countries that have been taking the business and human rights agenda seriously enough in a verifiable way. So set the policy frameworks and actually do their best to implement them with effectiveness. So even if you have an app, but a national action plan, but it's sitting somewhere, it creates a lot of, let's say, confusion and mistrust, because people will have expectations, and when the implementation is weak or none, then of course reinforces the lack of credibility of our authorities, both business and government. Government mostly, but very often at the national level, there's a well-established perception that power speaks to each other. So the powerful business and the powerful in government speak behind the scenes, and there is a corporate capture of the state, including regulation. Therefore, when things are not done openly and transparently, and then are not actually implemented in a reasonable way, it reinforces a very negative spiral, a race to the bottom somehow, that only reinforces bad practices, bad messaging, and the lack of trust, which is at the center of any kind of construction if we want to look into the future. So I will say, sadly, the south of Europe and Eastern Europe and Southeastern Europe is in general, overall, lagging behind in comparison with Western Europe, but not very different than Latin America, many places in Asia, and many places in Africa, even the Middle East. So you're not alone in being one of the very many, the majority of governments that are not really doing their part.
Thank you, Mr. Pesha. I'd like to ask you again. I'm sorry, would like to comment, Mr. Pashai?
The explanation was very clear. So Albania is not part of that. And besides the fact that we are, let's say, together with other countries that not reacting to the guiding principles, this does not make me happy. I know other countries, but I got the answer. I'm clear. Albania is not part of those countries. This is a sad news for me. I didn't know, because I'm not on those networks. In my view, I expect that soon Albania must be part of such initiatives, because it's not a good to have. For us, it's a must.
Yes.
To improve.
Actually, this same week, we had a first regional event organized jointly between our working group, the Office of the High Commissioner, and UNDP, the regional office in Istanbul, which I believe covers Albania. And it was the first ever regional event on business and human rights for Eastern Europe and Central Asia states. And it was the kickoff of a race to the top exercise building the infrastructure for peer learning and for peer pressure and for the exchange of experience. And of course, being the first event was a starting point, but this is going to be happening on regular basis with activities of awareness raising, capacity building, and strengthening and promoting collaboration regularly. So it would be very good to get in touch with UNDP because they are our regional partner on the ground as a facilitating agency for making this agenda to be implemented at national level. So we're not, we know that we have a problem and a gap, but we are also addressing it as much as we can.
All right, thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Pesh, I'd like to ask you again. We've talked about how corruption deeply affects Albania and how it affects human rights, basic worker rights. I know the work that you do back at the UN has a very strong relation with the nexus between anti-corruption and human rights. How specifically, how is the context of this nexus between the two? Thank you.
Yeah, our working group issued a report, so a comprehensive, let's say, analysis of the connection between corruption and respect for human rights by business. And that was presented to the Human Rights Council on early July. It's available. So we have dig deeper in this connection. What we see very clearly is that corruption is at the root cause of many, if not overall, pretty much every human rights abuse and violation, because it talks about weak governance. And as I said in my first intervention, governance is fundamental, goal 16, institutions. So if we don't have the institutions in place and they are weak, the solutions will be built on weak foundations and therefore will have a very practical problem for implementation, if not a complete failure. So that's one element. The other element is something that ICC and other business associations have been articulating quite well, also the OECD, that anti-corruption from business is part of business integrity, is part of a mindset of doing the right thing, even if it's no one is watching. So you have to be consistent with what you put in your walls, principles, values, and challenge them specifically and especially when you have dilemmas, when you're confronted with real situations. And that is the opportunity. And what we are also seeing with great expectation is that the practice of fighting corruption by business, integrating an anti-corruption and integrity lens into their corporate governance is the exact foundation that we need for the same companies to embed and to manage human rights negative impacts preventatively, because prevention is at the center. And the final comment is that we lack in general sufficient political will from governments to address this issue seriously enough. And we need will and leadership from business to move more aggressively, more clearly from good intentions and good practices in some jurisdictions to the reality check of good practices in all jurisdictions, with a focus on practical implementation and its effectiveness. So the evidence has to speak by itself. So it's not enough to have training or to have, let's say, a policy or to have an ethics department if you cannot demonstrate that you actually understand the challenges that you face in any given jurisdiction, and you're actually moving in the right direction, addressing those challenges at its root. It's very clear that corruption is very systemic. It has many causes. Therefore, the solution that we see is, of course, systemic at the same time. So it needs collaboration, international organizations, global industry associations, national level, and build a coalition of the willing, let's say, the ones that want to make a change, and build that coalition in order to address in real practical terms what are the challenges on the ground. We know what is needed in terms of leadership from business, and what we see is that most part of the governance structures of business are ill-equipped to go beyond financial risks. In general, the boards of companies are very homogenic, tend to be to suffer from group thinking, so they think very much alike, You don't have challengers. You have very little diversity, not to mention gender diversity, but perspectives diversity, life experience diversity. Some companies are integrating competencies around the environment. We haven't really seen almost anything around human business and human rights yet. And if the governance structure of a company is ill-equipped, is not trained, doesn't have the right lens, see the world in a very narrow perspective, is short-term in terms of their incentives, of course that is going to be translated into the mandate to the CEO and then the operational managers, whatever they are. So this is actually one of the conversations that we're having at the World Economic Forum, the Global Future Council on Human Rights. We are discussing precisely what are the set of competencies that we need at the board in terms, not the composition of individuals, but the competencies that we have to have there in order to be able to drive change in reality. And the second element that we're discussing there is social justice or justice overall. Justice thinking in historical justice, reparation, restitution, let's say the legacy of the systemic racism, the legacy of classism, the legacy of colonialism, etc. But also think about justice in an intergenerational way, to say justice looking into the future. What are we today doing to inherit a better future, not a worse off future for the future generations that have not been born yet? And that is a very fundamental conversation that actually the business community at the World Economic Forum is bringing in. Quality of governance and justice at the center of the future. And that will be, let's say, my final contribution. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Pesce. You mentioned earlier that there needs to be a coalition of the willing, and the ICC is certainly one of the few willing organizations and one of the leaders in this topic. So I'd like to ask Ms. Schiavi, I know this is an area for a fact for the ICC. How do businesses see the link between corruption and human rights on the ground firsthand?
Thank you, Angela. Happy to answer that. And I do want to first say that I beg to differ with what my colleague Dante Pesce said, that I wouldn't necessarily generalize that most companies are not really down the path on business and human rights. There are pioneers, and not just pioneers, there are a number of companies that have done a lot. So we need to recognize that, and we need to continue to see business as part of the solution and not part of the problem. And I know Dante sees that, but it needs to be said here today. ICC Albania represents the private sector, and we really need to salute what the private sector is doing and encourage it going forward. And to your precise question, yes, ICC was.
And Vivian, I am with you on that. So
cool. So glad to hear that.
This conversation would actually not be even happening if that was not the case.
Okay.
That we're being able
great.
to have an honest conversation of progress made, but also the big challenges.
We know we still have work to be done, definitely. And ICC did issue recommendations on this nexus on anti-corruption and human rights. ICC, as I mentioned before, was a pioneer on the business fight against corruption. We actually, I'm not sure if it was said yet, but we're the only business organization with observer status to the UN. So we're well positioned to input. Basically, as Dante Pesce said, a lot of the processes companies already have can be used for both anti-corruption and promoting the business respect for human rights. So companies don't have to reinvent the wheel. Smaller companies, this can sometimes seem daunting for them. They can use their present due diligence and risk management systems, although obviously there we have to focus on mitigating the impacts on people, not just to the company's bottom line. And so obviously training is part of that. It's not the only approach, but it has to be integrating human rights in the present, anti-corruption and compliance training of employees. And these can include real life scenarios, because as was said before by a previous speaker, a lot of the challenges are in gray areas. They're not necessarily somebody hanging you a big bucks of bills. It can be conflicts of interest. It often is, or gifts and hospitality. It can be a mix of different things. How do you identify it? How can the smaller companies identify it? This is a real priority for ICC, is building capacity of SMEs, because as Crispin Conroy said before, we have companies of all sizes in our membership, and smaller SMEs and MSMEs are important target for us in terms of building capacities. And corruption and human rights are not the only two topics where greater alignment is needed. We need greater alignment on linked issues such as money laundering, tax evasion, and so forth. So in short, we need to make an impact not just within company processes, but also to work outside of companies through collective action, governments and companies working together, but also with civil society. Governments need to, often the governments have laws on the books, but they're not necessarily enforced as they should be. Whistleblowing laws, anti-bribery, non-discrimination, protection of labor rights. And from our perspective, so what matters is putting in place a focus that puts people at the heart of the solutions, especially for those that are most vulnerable to corruption, fraud, and human rights breaches. I want to echo what Professor Zindi said, is that the youth has to be part of our solutions, because like Professor Zindi said, they communicate fast. I know from obviously from experience, and as you do, that they're often very keen on all these issues of the SDGs that Crispin Conroy was mentioning. This is close to their heart. They're our allies, and we have to make them part of the solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chiavi. Before I take the topic back again into Albania, I'd like maybe to ask Mr. Conroy, judging by his experience, the work that the companies are doing on this topic, on this matter, maybe it's an Eastern European way of thinking, but do companies have a conflict of interest in implementing these guidelines and these principles? Thank you.
Well, that's a big question to ask, Angelo. Look, I think that the way people saw it in the past was that the business was against these sort of things. That, it wasn't in their interests to. And I come from a government background and a human rights background, so I'm a little bit biased, I guess. But I think probably the perception was that business thought that they would tick boxes if they had to. That it was, it was really an obstacle to doing business, or something that was a burden. Maybe, that these sorts of laws were burdensome. And I'm talking more about human rights here, but perhaps it also applies to other areas, like in relation to environmental protections, a whole lot of different areas. So that was the perception, that it was something that business had to do, but it was a burden. My view, and this is not across the board, but I think it's moving very much in this direction. I think that's why Vivian came in so strongly to say that there is some good practice out there. A lot of businesses realize now that it's not just the right thing to do, but it's also good business. There was a study that our Secretary General likes to refer to. I think it was by one of the major consulting firms, and I won't mention the name, that actually said that companies that take into account at the highest levels, and I'm very attracted by what you were saying, Dante, about the sort of shape of leadership, because these things need to be taken up to that level. It's not about compliance officers at the operational level. It's about CEOs' mentalities, board mentalities. So, and you get that through diversity. But this report I mentioned showed that companies that at the highest levels took into account these sorts of things, the sort of ESG, what it's called, measures, actually performed better. So I think there's a growing realization, and certainly in the leadership of ICC, that it's not just about doing the right thing, but it's actually good business.
Thank you, Crispin. I'd like to ask Mr. Pashai, you working closely with businesses, do you see the same trends? You mentioned earlier just one training since you created it for human rights from businesses, but do you see a trend growing in Albania addressing these issues? Thank you.
Yeah, frankly speaking, I see a trend which is going on a positive way. There is still a lot to improve, but there is a positive trend. I think that, as I mentioned in the beginning, if the economy is competitive, everything will come. Someone mentioned that, of course, this is a good business. So they realize that it's a good business if they do such things. And that is happening now, slowly, but it's happening. So we have companies which are investing in people, which are respecting human rights. We have more and more. Of course, we are far away from what we want to achieve, but this does not mean that there is not progress at all. And the progress is coming with time, the progress is coming with knowledge, the progress is coming because of many information that is coming around, even from such projects from UNDP or from United Nations or from, so everything helps. Who is contributing more, I don't know, but everything helps. And in capitalism, it's very important to be competitive. And in order to be competitive, you have to respect some rules, you have to be more genuine in the way you do things. So that is the overall what is happening here. Of course, we have a lot of things to do. That is for sure that we have a lot. And I think that we need at least some decades to achieve what I hope and what I see in my dreams to achieve in the labor market.
Thank you, Mr. Pashai. So I'd like to ask Professor Jindi. Mr. Pashai said that it's a project coming with time. Do you see that happening anytime soon? And how can we address these challenges in the future? Thank you.
Oh, interesting, though. The whole panel is very interesting. And actually, when I decided to be part of this Week of Integrity this year, because I was part of the Week of the Integrity last year too, it came out the idea that, yes, I have to share some of the findings of the study that I did for the youth public and political engagement in this country. And I'm still focusing on youth. That's why I'm bringing in the issue. And because they are the future in the end of the day, what are we doing? We're building a society for whom? And this is kind of translated in everybody's life, in everybody's family. So problems related to youth, political engagement, do not always receive the attention from policymaking. The youth often see engagement in politics as only one way to solve their problems. Usually they start with getting involved in civil society, and then, by then promoted, they move towards the political youth forums. Sometimes their way is obstructed by the old-fashioned mindset of traditional party members who consider the youth as inexperienced. They cannot be part of the decision, they cannot be part of the leadership, the parliament, the government, municipal councils, and this is very much good governance issue. Today, young people deserve real opportunities to participate in processes and contribute to practical solution and advanced development of this country. Because when we allow them to organize, to voice their opinions, and play a meaningful role in political decision, we see change. We foster positive, lasting change. They also become more likely to demand and defend democracy and ask for greater inclusiveness and opportunities. But sometimes it's interesting to study and to research how they see political integrity, because it's very much linked to the good governance we are talking before. Political integrity is inseparably linked with the internal democracy of the parties. That's how it is reflected later on in the government structures. The way the candidates are selected, the way the youth is promoted within the party. Young activists are aware that the functioning of their the party internal democracy and the hierarchy of values in their party sometimes do not follow the rules, regulation, procedures, and they are part of this not following the rules. And it's fundamental to take into consideration that integrity of this generation, it's so important. It builds a society, it builds the future, and it prevents definitely the political corruption. The economic and social situation created by COVID-19 demonstrates that young people are demanding a shift in who has the power and how that power is used. Yet young people still find themselves marginalized from mainstream politics, and they are limited in their ability to exercise the same influence in decision making. And we need to study this kind of behavior. We need to study this kind of trend. Today, young people deserve real opportunities to participate in political processes, in public decision, and being active and contribute to practical solution and find a good way to advance the development of this country. And I'm really pleased that I had the opportunity to share just very little of the research we have done, because it's not public yet and I cannot share it, but it's very interesting how these young people perceive the integrity within the party, and later on, how this is implemented in government and in our everyday life.
Thank you very much, Professor. Unfortunately, now we're reaching our time deadline, but I will leave the floor open if anyone has any last short remarks. Yeah, yes, Conrad, please.
I just wanted to draw it all together and just confirming, I guess, Professor Zindi's comments that it's all about the youth, and they will drive these changes. So when you look, I think also Dante Pesce mentioned that a lot of the changes that we're looking at around business and human rights, and also in the integrity field, are being driven by consumers and civil society. So look, I know I've got three young teenage daughters. I know you have children too, Viviane, who are probably demanding the same sort of things, that they will want to see these changes being implemented. So it's being driven at all levels, not just by business and not just by government, but by consumers and the youth. So I'll just make that final point.
Thank you very much. Thank you, all the participants in this panel. I know it was mainly a subject and a conversation about the future for the young generations of the future. So I hope maybe with coming together from participants from the private sector, also from other organizations, maybe even states, this all nexus can come together and maybe achieve these results that are that were effectively written 10 years ago, and still today countries like Albania still haven't signed them. So thank you all again for being here today.
It is now time for a speech from Mrs. Adea Pirdeni. She's Deputy Minister of Justice in Albania.
Të nderuar të ftuar, nderuar pjesëmarrës, ishte kënaqësi e veçantë për mua të përshëndes panelin të drejtat e njeriut dhe biznesi në themel të një të ardhme të qëndrueshme, në të cilin u evidentua ndër të tjera roli i komunitetit të biznesit në avancimin e vlerave të integritetit si dhe të standardeve etike në një shoqëri. Të vepruarit me integritet, si dhe të vepruarit në respektim të parimeve morale dhe etike në punë administratës publike, është po aq etike, por njëherë është dhe vështirë, ashtu si dhe në jetën e përditshme. Kjo është një sfidë me të cilën përballen tashmë jo vetëm institucionet publike, por paralelisht me të përballet dhe sektori privat. Transparenca, llogaridhënia, profesionalizmi i një punonjës administratës publike ka po aq rëndësi sa dhe profesionalizmi, transparenca dhe llogaridhënia i një punonjësi në një sektorin privat. Në këtë mënyrë, të gjithë të komponentë bashk synojnë për të forcuar ofrimin e shërbimeve në respektim të drejtave themelore të qytetarëve, por dhe në respektim të parimit të zbatimit të ligjit. Natyrisht, shkëmbimi midis institucioneve publike dhe aktorëve të biznesit është shumë i rëndësishëm. Nga ky shkëmbim, organet administratës publike mund të tërheqin mësime shumë të vlefshme. Orientimi i dukshëm i sektorit privat drejt eficiencës, mirëmenaxhimit të kohës dhe të punës, zbulimit të qasjeve të reja në administrim dhe në komunikim, si dhe prirja drejt reduktimit të kostove janë aspekte ku institucionet publike duhet të hedhin syt për të zbuluar metoda vetë përmirësimi. Por jo vetëm kaq. Modelet e suksesshme që sektori privat, si brenda ashtu dhe jashtë vendit, ka krijuar tashmë për të garantuar integritet në organizimin e brendshëm, duhet të shërbejnë si modele edhe për sektorin publik. Më konkretisht, si bizneset e mëdha, por tashmë gjithnjë më shumë, dhe bizneset e mesme dhe të vogla kanë krijuar dhe zbatojnë mekanizma të brendshëm për të parandaluar, si dhe për të evidentuar setet korruptive. Natyrisht që modelet të tilla mirëqeverisë të brendshme duhet të udhëhiqen dhe të mbështeten nga leadershipi. Nëse organet drejtuese të një biznesi besojnë fort në qeverisjen e bazuar në etikë, natyrisht që një frymë e tillë do të shpërndahet në mënyrë kapilare në të gjitha strukturat e një biznesi. Në mënyrë analoge dhe në avancimin e zbatimit të parimeve të integritetit në administratën publike, leadershipi mbart një rol primar, jo vetëm në proklamimin e këtyre rregullave, por edhe në zbatimin e tyre në praktikë. Në këtë drejtim dhe me përgjegjësi të plot për leadershipin në avancimin e politikave antikorrupsion, Ministria e Drejtësisë në cilësinë e koordinatorit kombëtar kundër korrupsionit ka ndërmarrë një sër nismash në kuadër të parandalimit të korrupsionit në administratën publike. Nisëm e ndërmarrërishtës është pikërisht miratimi i planit integritetit të Ministrisë së Drejtësisë, si dhe metodologjisë së vlerësimit të riskut për organet e administratës qendrore. Këto janë mekanizma të cilat janë të frymëzuara nga modelet të ngjashme të zbatuara në botën e biznesit, të cilat ofrojnë kornizën konceptuale në lidhje me politikat, si dhe masat për të parandaluar shkelet e integritetit të zyrtarëve publik në institucion, si dhe natyrisht ndihmojnë në forcimin e rezistencës institucionale ndaj cënimeve të integritetit. Krijimi një kuadër të mirëfillt në funksion të forcimit të integritetit në administratën publike, ashtu si dhe në biznese, nuk do të kishte impaktin e duhur nëse nuk do të zbatohej nga punonjës të mirë informuar, si dhe të ndërgjegjshëm për rolin e tyre në zbatimin e këtyre mekanizmave. Në këtë aspekt, informimi i vazhdueshëm i stafit, trajnimi i tyre, si në sektorin publik, ashtu dhe në atë privat, ndikon drejt për drejt në krijimin e një habitati që refuzon sjelljet korruptive. Në këto procese, që duken se bashkojnë më shumë se sa i largojnë aktorët publik dhe privat, Ministria e Drejtësisë, në cilësinë e koordinatorit kombëtar kundër korrupsionit, në takimet të vazhdueshme me dhomat e drejtësisë, si dhe aktorët e tjerë të rëndësishëm në fushën e biznesit, ka evidentuar nevojën për të shkëmbyer praktikat më të mira në këtë drejtime, dhe më konkretisht, praktika me fokus forcimin e partneritetit për të rritur integritetin. Në përfundim, më lejojnë të ritheksoj se mbeten besim plot se nga ky shkëmbim do të vazhdojnë të rezultojnë iniciativa të tjera edhe më solide në drejtim të rrënjosjes së kulturës së integritetit në sinergji të plot midis sektorit publik dhe atij privat. Ju faleminderit.
It is now time for our second panel of the day. The topic is Media and Journalism for Integrity, Opportunities, and Challenges and Ethics. Our guests will be Associate Professor Dr. Belinda Budini, Dean of Faculty of Humanities, Education and Liberal Arts at the European University in Tirana, Mr. Olsi Dekovi, Deputy Head of the Office of the Council of Europe in Albania, also Mrs. Danica Ilic, Correspondent for Ethical Journalism Network from the UK, Mr. Besar Likmeta, he is Chief Editor for BIRN Albania, and the moderator will be Mrs. Marcela Carapancho, journalist with A2 CNN here in Tirana.
Thank you so much for investing your time with us today. My name is Marcela Carapancho. I'm a political journalist, reporter, and presenter in A2 CNN, a news affiliate channel of CNN International here in Tirana in Albania. I'm so glad, in fact, and to be here with you today to moderate this panel. But we are going to discuss a very fantastic thematic today: media and journalism for integrity, opportunities, challenges, ethics. We will be talking about the freedom of speech, media, disinformation, fake news, ethics, etc. But before we dive this discussion, I be safe and sound for you and your family in this COVID time. So let's hope every one of us and your family to have safe and sound on these days. Our goal today is to discuss about the integrity of media and, of course, the role of journalists in this field. But before of this, we will take a few moments just to for each other to have briefly introduce of yourself and tell a little bit more about your background. Sounds good? I would like to start with Professor Belinda Budini and then with Danica Ilic, Olsi Dekovi, and at least, but not for the importance, but with our colleague Besar Likmeta. Sorry, I can't hear. Professor, you have to unmute
right,
your...
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Marcela. Again, my name is Belinda Budini. I'm the Associate Professor at the European University of Tirana, and I'm Dean of the Faculty of Humanities, Education and Liberal Arts. At the same time, I'm the head of the Department of Humanities and Communication. My research interests are on the media and the political spectrum, from both a political communication stance, and also the theory of the media. So that's it for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Danica Ilic is with us. Thank you.
It's a great pleasure to be here today with all of you. I'm Danica. I've been a journalist since 1997 when I started reporting for the infamous independent Serbian radio station B92. Then I moved to London to work for the BBC World Service. And in recent years, I work as a media consultant, mostly in media development. I work for the Ethical Journalism Network. So the theme of ethics, disinformation, trust in media, integrity is really in my focus.
Thank you. The floor now is for Olsi. I think it's ready.
Yes. Hello, everybody. I'm also very pleased to join such a distinct and quite diverse a panel, and definitely I like very much the topic, which is one of the areas that Council of Europe is working extensively since many years in Albania. I represent the office here. I'm deputy head of Council of Europe office in Tirana, and as I mentioned earlier, we work in many areas, but human rights and is one of the key pillars of our work. And here, freedom of expression, freedom of media constitute an important part of our assistance. We will have a chance to discuss further on how we are doing that in partnership with many other partners in and out of the country. Thanks.
Thank you. And Besar?
Hi, everyone. My name is Besar Likmeta. I'm an editor for the Balkan Investigative Reporting Network based in Tirana, Albania. The Balkan Investigative Reporting Network by its name, by definition, is a network of media development centers across the region and investigative outlets. We publish we publish a number of publications, both in local language, but also in English. And our regional core publication is Balkan Insight, but also we do television in some countries. In Albania, we do print and online.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be among of you today and to moderate this panel. And I would like to start with Professor Budini, because I think I want to know your opinion about the journalism today. There is a big crisis in relation to what we think that is reliable information. How do you see the situation with misinformation or disinformation nowadays, having in mind also that we are in a pandemic time, in COVID time, and I want to stop here just for these difficult days that journalists are passing through with COVID. Yeah, Professor Budini?
Okay, thank you. I have a weak problem, internet connection, but I'm going on. The crisis, as you call it, it can be otherwise framed as a struggle to distinguish between facts and opinions also. This doesn't start now, of course, but with the digital media, it spreads widely. That's what we have also seen with the pandemic. All sorts of conspiracy theories and untrustworthy material circulating online, and a broad array of misinformation and disinformation occurring. To me, as a media researcher, this is related to the blurring of the lines between what is called a fact and what is called an opinion these days, and the incapacity to distinguish between the two. Research shows actually that the politically aware, digitally savvy, and those more trusting of the news media fare better, statistically speaking, according to the polls. Political partisans are both influenced by their political alignment and appeal to statements. Therefore, the distinguishing between factual and opinion statements in the news shouldn't be taken for granted. A new Pew Research Center survey of 5,000 USA adults examines a basic step in that process, whether members of the public can recognize news as factual, therefore something that's capable of being proved or disproved by objective evidence, or as an opinion that reflects the beliefs and values of whoever expressed it. The findings from this survey, conducted between February 22 and March 8 of 2018, reveal that even this basic task presents a challenge. The main portion of the study, which measured the public's ability to distinguish between 5 factual statements and 5 opinion statements, found that a majority of people correctly identified at least 3 of the 5 statements in each set, but this result is only a little better than random guesses. Far fewer got all 5 correct, and roughly a quarter got most or all wrong. Even more revealing is that certain people do far better at parsing through this content than others. Those with high political awareness, those who are very digitally savvy, and those who place high levels of trust in the news media are better able than others to accurately identify news-related statements as factual or as opinion. Therefore, I've mentioned this in order to better understand that media literacy is very important these days to be taught at universities, as we are at the European University of Tirana, of course, but all over the world, because this is a huge issue. And reliable information starts from there, from distinguishing facts from opinion, which is a big concern.
Yeah, as you mentioned, Professor Budini, do you think that journalists today are raising the standards of reporting nowadays when we are talking about coronavirus? Do you see any change in their reporting? Are the standards lower or are higher? How you can define them?
It depends on whether we are speaking of digital media or the traditional media.
Yeah, both one. For the portals from online news and reporting live, as I'm a reporter in field, which is the opinion of which is your opinion about this news? How you see? There are a lot of news, thousands news that go away every day, and all of us, we are focused on. We have such death. We have such people infected with coronavirus. Everything that you can heard about these days, because I think it's important not only for me that I am a reporter in field, but for the standards and for the ethics. I'm talking about ethics in journalism. How do you see it?
Okay, of course, there is the dramatic construction of the news, as we call it in academic terms. And this is something that has to do with the media logic. Journalists also have to tell a story. So there is a huge story to tell in journalistic terms in the pandemic. So I'm not sure if there is, because it has to be measured, if there is much difference between the way traditional media reports those news regarding the pandemic, between traditional media and the online media. I think they both, in the Albanian context, they both do seemingly report these in a dramatic construction way. So we have seen, even in debates, primetime debates in television, that the word death is a title on bold letters, and is like something that we don't found only on the social media, these terms and this pessimistic way of viewing things, but even in the traditional media. So it's very present, but I would name it as dramatic construction, because this is something that has happened before. It's not completely new, but its arranged and its depth is more enhanced today. And that's why we view it as a problem of actual currently events.
Of course, thank you. I want to know the opinion of other panelists about this topic at first, the reporting of social media on online media and traditional one, how you can see the corona reporting of every colleague, every journalist nowadays. Is there any ethic damage that the journalist did not respect? Everyone who wants to take the floor is free. Not only in Albania, such you can talk only also for your countries.
Well, maybe I will just say a few words about Professor Bellini's remarks, and I completely agree. And what we are seeing in Albania, actually, we're seeing everywhere else, that sensationalism in reporting such a great topic, probably the biggest story that we will report in our lives. It went some way, at some point, it went the wrong direction. But I also think that the pandemic and what we do as journalists and media during these extraordinary times is a great opportunity for journalism. I think that by building trust in media and reporting ethically on the pandemic and returning to the public interest media, as we have to return to public interest everything, since our, first of all, health system everywhere in the world is in a real problem. I think that we can use this opportunity to change our newsrooms, to change our content, to change the way we report, to change the way we see media. So I will just say that, for instance, my colleagues at Ethical Journalism Network, we produced 7 points guide for covering a pandemic. So you have such a kind of very brief summary of what are the points that you need to take into account when you report on COVID, such as stick to the facts, practice accountability, show humanity, check your use of terminology. As a professor was saying, the word death. How do you report? When do you report that someone has died, or someone is a victim, or someone lost the battle? Also, we say that we should avoid social stigmatization and stereotyping, especially against minorities and vulnerable groups. Obviously, challenge hate speech, and practice duty of care. I think that we will see much more in the coming months, that we as media managers need to take care of our workers or journalists who are struggling deeply, not only to cover the story, but probably have some mental health issues as well.
Thank you. Besar or Olsi, do you want to add something else?
Yes, well, I just want to underline that this is a really difficult time for journalists. And I think the journalists in Albania are doing their utmost, considering the limitations on their work and the pressures they are under, the total control from the government on information, and the disinformation being parlayed by political parties. So they are a minority under fire, trying to, at their best, I think, to report objectively on what's going on the pandemic. But on the other side, you have a lot of disinformation and propaganda by political actors, which is spewed sometimes in the semblance of news, but is not news. So I think a lot of the ethical missteps that we see, it's because of what is there pushed as actually news reporting, but is actually propaganda and disinformation by specific interests. And the problem is, for the public, is very difficult to disconcern, even for a public who has high media is high media, let's say, IQ and information, to recognize disinformation or misinformation, because it's a form of let's say information which is produced by people who are very well acquainted with how news works. But I think the journalists overall are doing a wonderful job.
Yeah, thank you. Also, we talk about freedom of speech, but in his name, can we post everything that we can find out? I'm talking about I know that you are aware of some photos from coffins about COVID, you know, that were around in social media a few days before in Albania, but we can post everything. Is there any ethic that we have to have?
Well, actually, I'd like to join previous speakers that, I mean, media has an important role to hold journalists, to hold those in power to account, and to ensure access to information, particularly in acute time of crisis. However, this comes at a price, and the recent COVID crisis is not the first of its kind, where such principles and ethical standards are put in test. For this purpose, I mean, not only in the media sector, but in many other sectors in our society, COVID challenges, I mean, from the Council of Europe perspectives, have been, I mean, we try to address in a uniform manner. When it comes to media, the Council of Europe has developed certain guidelines which are fit for the times of crisis, including health crisis, and could be a good source of information to uphold the ethical standards. When it comes to the Albanian reality, and I can speak only as an Albanian citizen and not as a Council of Europe representatives here, I mean, I think I appreciate a lot the role that media, you journalists, have on day-to-day basis to cope with this challenge. First of all, by being in the first line and being subject on a potential, let's say, challenged by COVID itself, and then to maintain all the professional and ethical standards, which is not easy. There is a flow of information coming from all fronts. There is a lot of political debate, which is also uncomparable, I must say, with many countries in the region and the European level, which impacts. So media being the only source of information on one side, or the main source of information, has a lot of responsibilities. There is a lot of information going. There is a lot also, I must say, not necessarily unethical, but deficitary ethical reporting and comments on daily basis, which needs to be tackled. And however, I think it's very difficult to look for quick fixes. It is, as Professor Budini mentioned earlier, it requires a long-term process where, I mean, there is the media literacy programs taught at all levels, starting from elementary schools to university. We need to discuss more among professionals, including in the media professionals, on the ethical standards, and not have some documents which are there but often ignored. I mean, speaking about the code of ethics, but we need to be more active altogether as a society. So on one hand, if an informed citizen will know what to filter and how to filter, media will also respond to this filtering by becoming more ethical and more professional. But I also like to share, if I may, in a 2 sentences, what was mentioned earlier, that it's true that shift to digital media and the flow of online advertising revenues away from traditional media and towards internet platforms have created a precarious economic situation for many journalists across Europe and, of course, Albania, who have seen political or business interference in their work, as well as the worsening employment conditions. These factors, I must say, have variously put a strain on the pluralism, quality and integrity of journalism in many Council of Europe member states. So the COVID pandemic has only underlined the indispensable nature of freedom of expression and media independence in our times.
Yeah, Danica, I want to talk more about the journalism. Do you think we have crisis in journalism? And I want your opinion from a different view, such as you can talk for your country and the international perspective.
I think that journalism faced, if you want, the first wave of crisis with the digital revolution. I think that we journalists and media, mainstream media, we didn't understand well what was happening to us, that 20th century linear one-way reporting is over, and that as Professor Joy Rossen said, people that used to be known as audience has taken over with social media and reporting, posting, writing, producing any kind of content. I think that was the biggest crisis that we faced. I also think that journalism is in crisis. I think quality journalism is in crisis. But I also think that the journalism we have, these are also gold time for journalism. This is, first of all, we have a lot of great quality journalism around the world. And I think that by kind of channeling what is happening to us right now, not only with COVID and with the digital revolution, but also with the problem of disinformation and trust. I see this as a big opportunity. Somehow I am full of hope that quality journalism will prevail. The thing with the difference between international perspective and regional, what I see, because I live in the UK, but I also work in the Balkans. I think that the perspective, the biggest issue, the biggest challenge for the media in the Balkans are business models. Everything is around ownership and making profits and choosing the right business model, how the media will survive. Because here in the Balkans, we don't see, I will be quite honest, we don't see the state or society support for public interest journalism. Whilst in the UK, and especially in on some level in the USA, the public interest journalism or quality journalism or responsible reporting is taking over. And you see more and more kind of the focus is changing and turning towards local journalism, supporting local initiatives and supporting public interest journalism. Because as we've seen at the beginning of the COVID crisis, you had a sharp rise towards trust in traditional media. For instance, everyone in the UK turned on the BBC because whom you're going to trust when is the crisis? Well, the media that reports responsibly, professionally, that you have trust in. So maybe the message for the colleagues in the Balkans, and actually that's what we do and try with UNESCO, trying to build this trust in media in the Balkans with strengthening the ethical standards and good governance. Because when, in the time of crisis, you want to be informed from a media that you have trust in. And that can only be the ethical professional media.
Totally agree. I want to pass the word now to my colleague, Likmeta. As a part of investigative journalism, do you consider that there should be limits in journalism, ethical standards that we have to respect? Or which are these limits? How far can go a journalist can go?
Well, to be honest, I think that the problem with journalism is it has too many limits. Just going back to what previous speaker said, the market in Albania doesn't function. The market doesn't function because it's pretty much under the control of a few people, and it was done this way, the way that the licenses for the digitalization process were handed over by the authorities, the way that, let's say, the financing of the media, which is not transparent. It doesn't allow like independent actors who provide quality journalism to compete fairly. And when there is no actors who are competing fairly in the market, you have this construct of media conglomerates or organizations whose main interest is to serve the people who are paying for their services, which are the politicians. So it's most of the output the Albanian media provides, it's not quality because they're not directing it to the audience. They're not selling it to the audience. They're selling it to the political parties who are interested in spinning disinformation. This creates a huge problem because once they're not interested in a quality product for the audience, there isn't much room left for quality journalism, and there isn't much investment into quality journalism. So even the meritocracy and the opportunities for journalists to actually be motivated, to be trained, aren't there because nobody is interested for quality journalists. So this creates a complete distortion of the market that makes it very difficult for the audience then not only to receive, let's say, news which are fact-checked or are ethical and everything else. Mm-hmm. But it creates a huge problem and distorts everything. So I think it's a complicated problem. It's not about the choice of a journalist when he wakes up in the morning. Should I be ethical when I report about stuff? But it's all the limits, all the walls around him.
Yeah, this is the ugly truth. But can you share with us how you can manage to find a balance between offering quality journalism and respecting ethical standards?
Well, I think in every newsroom, I mean, the misunderstanding in Albania, there is always about regulation and self-regulation, is that people don't understand that a lot of self-regulation only goes mostly inside the newsrooms. And this is something politicians don't get. It's the journalist has an editor, and the editor has another editor, and the editor-in-chief has the owner above him, and the market that conditions the owner also, because if you are in an unfunctioning market, how are you going to finance quality journalism? If I was even a media owner who was really interested to serve the public interest, if you are in a market which doesn't pay for the public interest, where are you going to find the money? So it's not only about the journalist doing the right thing. What we see in Albania, for example, but also across the region, we see a lot of tabloidization. We see a lot of let's say, poor copy-paste and poor quality journalism, but every ask the question, why is so much copy-paste in the region? Why is it intellectual property not protected? Why, in a sense, the market is so distorted? Where is the money to finance certain so-called journalism project, but which are not journalism project, being legacy media, digital native, or whatever types of media that exist out there? Where is the money coming from? Are they coming from corruption? Are they coming from organized crime? So a lot of what is sold off as news is not actually news. They're not news organization. They're like those Russian human bot farms when they sell disinformation. It's the same.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we pass through this every day, and in Albania we know better how the media function. But I want now to pass the word to the Mr. Dakove, because you work Dakove, sorry, you work at the Council of Europe, and you have in focus of your work every day the freedom of speech. But I want to ask you directly, how do you see the protection towards journalists today? How much journalists, us, how much are we protected in our freedom of speech? Which are your opinion about this?
Thanks a lot, Ms. Carpancho. I think I touched upon earlier, but it was quite to a large extent endorsed by Mr. Likmeta, and I fully subscribe to his experience and comments. Actually, if I can refer to the latest report of the platform for protection of journalists, established by the Council of Europe in partnership with more than 14 international media organizations, the figures are a little bit scary. In 2019, there were over 142 serious case threats to media freedom addressed to journalists directly. And which shows a growing pattern of intimidation to silence journalists that require urgent actions by member states to uphold the essential role of a press in democratic societies. The economic factor in, let's say, not well-established or distorted markets, or lack of it, is also another growing pattern and big concern for the journalists to survive, and let alone to expect a qualitative work. When it comes to Albania, the figures have also seen an increase, which shows that the situation, at least from the reports, it shows a notable increase of deterioration of journalists' working conditions in the country. So from 2000, there was 7 alerts from 2000, more in addition, from 2018 to 2019. And only currently in 2020, there are 5 alerts raised by media associations or journalists through the platform. And I think this is the start of the discussion. Raising a concern doesn't mean that it will automatically lead to the solution of the problem. The good news is that in many of these concerns, there is a reaction from the authorities, so there is a follow-up. However, individual cases, even if they are resolved, doesn't necessarily address the concerns that the rest of media and journalists face in the country. The problem we have faced, for instance, involve also the judiciary. We have observed that just only working with the journalists, journalist associations, or media in general, doesn't solve the problem. We need to involve into this picture and partner also the judiciary. This is why, several years ago, we initiated together with the European Union the program which aims to bring together judiciary and media professionals to discuss, understand the problems, but also to steer a process where both sides understands that, and not only understand but apply in their daily work, be it media professionals as well as judiciary, that they have to protect and uphold freedom of expression, but we need to respect also the right to privacy. This is a very thin line, which was not properly understood and continues to be vaguely understood by those stakeholders. This is why we are investing heavily in this direction, working with the courts, working with. This is to say that I was about to say that this has proved to be extremely important. Now we see that all these institutions are in a better situation when it comes to understanding, and this is the first step. And then we see how this will be applied in practice, so that the journalists are not unlawfully sentenced, convicted, or get heavy fines, which will further deteriorate their economic status, and in a way will impede the freedom of expression itself. So, I mean, Council of Europe has, at the European level, has countless of other recommendations, or called soft law of the Committee of Ministers, to member states on how to protect journalists and other media actors. The importance is not to have them, to read them, but to implement them. And we cannot do this without close and active partnership with all of you, with academia, definitely, and with all other stakeholders. I think media literacy is crucial. And we need, I mean, media has an important role to educate public. And this role is taken up to a certain degree, but there is a lot more to happen to educate public and to diminish the space from to the fake, or the ones who want to distort news or play with fake news, and to be as true as possible to the facts and to the interest of the public.
The public is our main mission, but I want to stop again to the freedom of expression with Professor Budini. Nowadays, we have plenty of sources to express our fundamental rights, like social media, online news portals, live streams, channel, etc. Is everything okay with the empowerment granted to online media? Is our democracy at risk? What do you think about it?
Of course, Marcela, freedom of expression and media freedom follow the same lines or fundamental principles in terms of democracy, but the state of this freedom is often debated. People in different countries and globally see the freedom of the press differently. So research centers also assess the state of this freedom and pay tribute to journalists who lost or have lost their lives in the line of duty. So for them, yes, of course, the freedom of press is very important, and how people globally see the freedom of the press, according to the findings, differs a lot. For example, majorities across Europe, North America, and Latin America say it is very important to have freedom of the press. But support is highest in Greece, where 89% say it is very important that the media can report the news without government censorship. Majorities in many other countries, including Australia or Turkey, South Africa, and even Nigeria, say the same. Freedom of the press is considered very important by fewer than half of adults in other countries, like South Korea, for example, or Israel, or Russia, and Lebanon. So it differs from country to country. There is also huge consensus among researchers and scientists these days that liberal democracy, there is a crisis of confidence in liberal democracy overall. So scholars may disagree about the nature and depth of the problem, but few would argue that nothing is amiss. Commentators also decry an increasingly familiar list of trends, including weakening civil liberties, eroding democratic norms, and growing support for parties and leaders whose commitment to democratic values and practices seems shaky, like populist or authoritarian. So progress toward democracy has been stalled or reversed in many emerging and developing nations like Albania, for example, while several wealthy, supposedly consolidated democracies have experienced significant and unexpected setbacks also. And these anxieties are being driven not only by subjective observations of political dynamics, but also by a growing body of data, of statistical data. So this is the state, and this can be widely debated, but in Albania we also have problems of freedom of the press, and I'm speaking about the traditional media mainly, but also regarding the online media. And we know that we have had problems on this regard, but I'm not going to the details. I only wanted or aimed at presenting here an overview of the state of the media freedom. So thank you.
Thank you for your words. And now I want to go back to Mr. Defu, because I want to insist to the freedom of speech and expression. Do you see any freedom of speech and expression versus fight against defamation affecting democracy? And if yes, do we have to regulate for better democracy? What we have to do more?
Well, of course. Defamation has a clear and direct impact on the way how democracy works, and we have seen a lot of examples in the recent years. But what would be interesting to bring it to the Albanian context, I think the proliferation of so many media portals is an achievement, I must say. It shows plurality, it shows democracy. However, there is a lot of growing concern when it comes to fake news, distorted news online, where I think most of the attention is going now. And the recent discussions to regulate media online is very vivid in the Albanian context since many years now. Various initiatives to regulate, in claiming that self-regulation, which is definitely the Council of Europe device for many years, following also the convention and the case law of the court. However, as we stand at the European level today, there are numerous initiatives in European countries aiming to regulate bits and pieces of the online media, but never going to the content, to the substance, to the freedom of expression. In the Albanian case, while certain reasoning put forward by initiators makes sense, because we need to find a balance between fake news and affected dignity of individuals or groups due to fake news. We need to apply very strict rules and I'd say following the recommendation of the Committee of Ministers of Council of Europe when it comes to legality, legitimacy, and proportionality of restrictions. Any restriction on the right to freedom of expression on the internet should be in compliance with the requirements of the Article 10 of the Convention. It is first have to be prescribed by a law, which is accessible, clear, unambiguous, and sufficiently precise to enable individuals to regulate the conduct. It should pursue a legitimate aim as exhausted in the Article 10 of the Convention. It is necessary, definitely necessary in democratic society and proportionate to the legitimate aim pursued. And definitely, I mean, the same recommendations also stress that the laws and policies related to the internet should be prepared by state authorities in an inclusive and transparent process that will include all the affected actors, including the private sector, civil society, definitely journalists, academia, and the technical community. Whether this is the case in Albania, well, I mean, maybe I leave the floor to other colleagues to confirm that. However, now, as we stand, there is a legal initiative going on in Parliament following the Venice Commission opinion, which has been very clearly stated what needs to be done if this initiative will go on. So we'll see what the new proposals of the Parliament will be about, and how this consultation process will have a chance in the coming weeks to have a more substantive discussion on this matter.
The majority insists to go on with this initiative, but let's see what they are going to reflect from the Venice Commission or from the Council of Europe. But I want to have some opinion from Besar or Danica about this topic that we were talking about. Do you have something to add?
Well, I think there is a wrong impression that online media is not regulated in Albania. It is regulated by the criminal code. Defamation is, and is also regulated from the civil code. There is a lot of legal complaints and lawsuits against journalists, against media outlets. A lot of them are SLAPP lawsuits. Not of them are they are motivated to suppress freedom of media and freedom of expression. They're not motivated to protect the dignity of people suing or the corporates or anything else. The question in Albania is whether should we grant now with this new legislation, this government-controlled or politically controlled administrative body, which is not professional, the right also to regulate. So we will add the next layer of regulation for these few digital native media outlets. The problem is this worked before? Let's just look at our experience. We've been regulated audiovisual media in terms of ethics for more than 2 decades. And what we see is that audiovisual media in Albania, the legacy media, are not more ethical than online media outlets. I mean, the problem with the regulation that being proposed by the government is that it's not up to international standards. I mean, international standards in terms of media, online media regulation, push for self-regulation. And there is efforts being made, and there has always been effort being made to make the, let's say, the online media market in Albania, more transparent, let's say more ethical, more quality journalism. But quality journalism also requires investment. It's not because you put some a complaint council, a group of regulators there who we're afraid that we are going to push more for censorship of censorship, that this is going to produce more quality journalism. Actually, it will be the complete opposite. Most international organizations, most local organizations, the Council of Europe, the European Commission, and they've been telling that to the government, but the government won't listen. And we're utterly disappointed that even after the opinion from the Venice Commission, the government insists of passing a law and trying to make a little bit of, let's say, cosmetic changes to the draft that they already have. And this is in utter lack of transparency because there is no stakeholders that are being consulted. Even Albanian legislation say when the law is being drafted, the stakeholders should be listened to while the drafting process go on. We don't want only to be, called on in Parliament in the last few days to give our opinion, which nobody listens, unfortunately.
My dear colleague, they have the vote in Parliament, so they are very convincing that they want to go on with this initiative. So let's hope what will be the best for us here in Albania with this media law. And I want an opinion from Danica. Do you think that journalists need some regulation?
I agree with my colleague Likmeta here. You know, if you have regulation such as was proposed by the Albanian government in the context as we have in Albania, you will get more likely censorship. I think, and I would argue strongly for self-regulation. That's the way to go, not only for the online media. And I think that we can't kind of differentiate anymore onto broadcasting, audiovisual, because online media are doing everything. So the problem here is understanding the context in which you're trying to impose regulation. And I would argue against it in the Balkan context and in Albania itself. I also think that there are different models. For instance, you have an amazing press council in Tirana. In other countries such as Norway, Denmark, where actually self-regulation works perfectly, and Norway is the country with a press freedom, top level of press freedom according to many reports. I think that finding a perfect, or maybe the model that works for Albania based on self-regulation, ethical standards, and a professional community where journalists and media workers understand what is the best for the media outlets in Albania is the model to go. You know, suggestions coming from government in the context in which we live right now. And I think, don't only think about the Balkan context, but also in the UK and the USA. We saw what has happened with the media freedom during the Trump administration. We need to think widely, and we need to bring professionals to understand and to decide about the media future.
Thank you. Now, as you mentioned, all of you mentioned before, our mission as journalists is to educate the public. And now I want to stop here because it's the main thing that the journalists do their work because of the public. So I want to take some opinion about how do more, because journalists can be more reliable in front of their public. The floor is open. Every one of you can take the word. It's the last part of our panel today.
Okay, I think I would just make a brief intervention about bringing up ethical standards and self-assessment within the media. What do? Do you have everything in place? Ethical codex, privacy policy? Are you transparent enough? Do you have your names of the owners and financial reports on your website, etc.? I think that by bringing or regaining trust with the audience is the way to go. So if you trust the media, and if you think that the media is reliable, professional, responsible, accountable, etc., you will go and consume the news and other media content from the media that it's trusted. So I strongly believe that actually, because I mentioned business models before, I think that trust is profitable, not only in the digital age, but everywhere. So I think that by strengthening ethical standards, ethical code, and also good governance, because you need to have a very good contracts with your media workers in order to have a good and happy environment for your journalists. I think that's something that we should be looking at more closely.
Because we discuss this subject often with our students, and one of the main functions of the media is said to be the role of educating people. But different scholars do not agree on this, because mainly scholars that come from journalistic grounds as well, because they think the journalists, the media as a whole, have a role to play in educating by being professional. So that's how journalists and how the media educate people, because there are schools, there are universities who take up that role, and mainly the journalists and the media have to do what they are supposed to do professionally in terms of having both sides involved, or having transparency philosophy underlining their reporting. And that's what, if they do their job properly and in ethical terms, but also professional terms, that's how they educate people. It's not that they do that in a proper or special program of education. This is old school media, the media of the 60s, but it's not the media of our today world. So the media is also underlined by commercial means. They have organizational, let's say, organizational struggles, and the way how they organize, how they work in offices, and the struggles in the everyday job practically have an impact on their content, how they report the news. So these are the struggles, and the economic struggles as well. And we have to understand that is also present in countries like Albania that have a poor infrastructure for investigation, for example. And I know from sources inside the media, they have difficulties in putting structures, building structures of investigative journalism, because it takes time, it takes money, it takes also financing, and there is a lack of financing on this regard. So I don't know, it's very difficult to speak concretely always, and I found this struggle, as I come from a journalism background. Also, I've worked as journalist for 10 years, and taking the role of the educator is difficult when you cannot fulfill your professional standards and aspirations. So journalists struggle a lot in these terms, along those lines in Albania and the Balkans in general. So I understand that it is very difficult for journalists in the field, but also for editors and directors and all people that constitute the environment, the media environment, because the struggles are multifold, and also from other sources that interfere, etc., etc.
Yeah, of course. Now I want the last message from my colleagues from Besar and Danica for journalists, how they can do their work and not be afraid of anything that can feel. Which is your message nowadays?
Well, I think that it's important for journalists to have an enabling environment where they can produce quality journalism. What we've seen in Albania, but also across the region, is that if you invest into journalists, they can produce really quality investigative reporting. And we work with reporters who actually work in these medias that there is a lot of complaints about. But once you provide them with editorial support, while you provide them with financial means, once you provide them with independent nonprofit outlets to publish their work, they publish excellent investigative journalism, overcoming unsurmountable odds, considering what they have against very powerful politicians, a judicial system who doesn't always respect freedom of speech or freedom of the media. So they have threats and everything, and a difficult environment to work. Consider that, like, for example, in successful media outlets internationally, one journalist's work might be reviewed by 8 editors, for example, in the New York Times. So if you have the editorial support, if you have the financial means, if you have, let's say, a media scene where freedom of expression is respected, then quality journalism will flourish. But if you have all these missing links, journalists themselves as human beings, as professionals, no matter how much professional they are, they cannot resolve everything. They cannot be the answer to everything. So I think we have to think a little bit more broadly how quality journalism is produced, and not only as journalists, or where is your ethics, Where is the standards? Where is the quality reporting? I mean, it's not that they don't want to, they just can't within this kind of environment.
Yeah, and I wish that no one of us journalists can be afraid, even though when we are before some words like fake news, like the ex-president Donald Trump said to our colleagues there, or Kazan or trash, as our Prime Minister Edi Rama usually used to call the medias here. But I don't know if Danica have something else to add.
I think that we journalists need to regain public space and take it from the politicians and from the officials and from the institutions. And I also agree with Bessar that we really need to support journalists and also not to exclude freelancers. So good trade unions, good contracts, journalists that are paid, female journalists that are protected from online harassment, and you'll get a good story and you'll have ethical standards. I also want to say that I really believe strongly that if you play on the card of good journalism in terms of not journalism that you will sell by having these sensational tabloid clickbait headlines, but investigative journalism as BIRN does everywhere in the region. If you play on that card, it might take longer. It's a long-term game. But at the end, that trust that audience have in you will pay off.
Thank you, dear colleagues. I'm so thankful and I'm so glad to moderate this panel with you today. It was my pleasure to have all of you with me in this communication online because of the COVID times. I hope that the next time we will see and be more in front of each other and to have meetings and hope that the Corona time we will forget it soon. Thank you very much, each one of you.
At the end of our second day, I invite you now to follow the concluding remarks from Mr. Ilir Daci of the ICC in Albania.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is now for the second time in a row that we organize the Week of Integrity, a platform to consolidate our mission to elucidate the concept of integrity, particularly in our society that strives towards economic development at high gear, but often compromising badly the values that are in fact the grounds for sustaining prosperity. It has been a wonderful event. A big thanks to our speakers and participants. Gathering different perspectives and views on topics of integrity and anti-corruption seems to be a good example of collective action for preservation of good value system. We heard that human capital is an essential element of the progress of business, that digital transformation is creating new terrific realities and opportunities, and that it causes hunger for big data. But all that must be managed carefully to protect privacy and freedom. We heard that ethics and integrity of media is essential to safeguard the rights and interests of the citizens. The necessity for free and independent media is imperative. We heard that economic recovery post-COVID crisis must be grounded in well-designed public policies, and that the principle of integrity must be held at its highest in the process of designing and implementing such policies. Those should aim at protecting competition, honest public procurement, domestic and foreign investments, fair redistribution through tax system, and last but not least, social inclusion. I would urge our local business community to increase the standards of integrity in their day-to-day business and to rely on the support of ICC and other organizations to cultivate integrity and anti-corruption in any processes of their business. You may use the ICC Business Integrity Compendium, different protocols and guidelines of OECD, the SDGs of UN, and recommendations of other agencies that play a significant role in addressing these matters. I would urge the governmental bodies to conduct transparent governance to the benefit of interest of the public. I would like to close my final remarks with a quote of the famous economist Hayek, who claimed that emergencies have always been the pretext on which the safeguards of liberty have been eroded. I wish you all good health. Thank you.